Welcome to our lecture on determining fabric quality for textiles. So in this lecture, we're going to focus on, there's a lot of different fabric tests, but we're going to look at some of the major ones to know and be familiar with, and some organizations that have set the standards for testing. Now, why are we even talking about testing, right? We don't like that word, tests. But it's important that you understand this is about, really what it's about is fabric quality. You do and run fabric tests to make sure that the fabric that you're purchasing or that you're using, that you're cutting out the pattern from, will do what it needs to do. So it's very important. It adds to the image of the brand when the quality that's expected of the product is matched in the textile, in the fabric. Really important is that it needs to meet expectations. There's nothing worse than a very expensive garment that has very poor quality, something that's deemed to be very overpriced for what you're getting, because you're going to lose customers. They will not go back to you. They'll go somewhere else. There's just too much competition and people won't waste their time with you. So that's really important. The needs need to meet by the expectations. Those expectations that you have, they need to match up. Now, why I'm stressing this to you is that we tend to look at, when you don't know anything about textiles, we tend to just focus on aesthetics. Oh, I like the color. That's so pretty. That's a cute print. But what you have to understand is that the looks, the color, the print, that's not enough for a fabric selection. You need to know that it will perform how you need it to perform, that it's comfortable, that it has a good hand or soft enough hand, or it's heavy enough to be appropriate for a coat, that it will perform. Remember that example I gave you of marketing a PE shirt made out of a tri-blend fabric that's not that breathable, so it really kept you too warm? They were marketing a shirt made out of that fabric as a PE shirt, physical education, for exercise. And they were returned by the caseload. Box after box after box returned because it was marketed incorrectly. Why? Not for the style, not for the drape, but because they didn't understand the quality of the fabric. They didn't understand that that was not going to meet the performance that was being expected. So that's really important. Now we're going to talk about actual industrial machines and testing procedures, but also what can you do if you start your own line and how do you test? Well, the first thing you need to do is have a pick glass. Now, we had pick glasses for you to use in the classroom. We are no longer in the classroom. So I strongly, strongly recommend you order one. You can get one for under $10 at Amazon. Get one. It needs to have, again, an inch marked on either side, and then it has the magnification. I recommend, if you can, pay a couple of dollars more and get the 2.5 times magnification, so you can see extra clear. But that's something that will help you when you're looking for and testing your fabrics at home when you're a small startup. So one of the things we want to look at is using the pick glass, and definitely look at things like fabric count, looking at the yarns, looking at the structure of the weave or the knit, making sure it looks even. So not just that surface glance, but really looking at it with magnification. Now, one thing that we look at is fabric count, and we've gone over this, but I want to review this again. You cut off a swatch of a woven and you can count the number of ends, the lengthwise yarns, or the number of picks, which are the widthwise yarns. So on the raw edge, you're going to look at how many ends on the top and how many picks on the side per inch. Or the number of wales on the lengthwise, or courses on the widthwise for knits. And that's how you get fabric count. So the number of yarns on the lengthwise, and the number of picks on the crosswise for a woven, and the number of wales and courses on a knit, okay, per inch. So you always list the lengthwise first, times, you put the times, so the multiplication, the x, and then you put the crosswise. So ends first and then picks, or warp and then weft yarns, the number of warp yarns and then the number of weft yarns, or for a knit, the number of wales times the number of courses. You always write it this way. And some of you missed it on the midterm, and this is really important. You counted how many warp yarns and you put 28. And I'm like, yeah, 28 by what? You forgot to count the weft yarns. You can't just count the warp. You have to count the weft. So you have to count how many yarns per inch. And it can vary throughout the fabric, believe it or not. So what you want to do is take multiple counts. You want to take a couple counts somewhere in the middle of the fabric and one on the other side, because sometimes it won't always match up. It should be very consistent, but it isn't always consistent. Be very careful when you buy fabric, and particularly in downtown LA, where you can buy a bolt fabric and it can be very defective and you wouldn't know it, and they don't tell you. Sometimes they don't know. So it's very important that you can take a couple of swatches from different parts of the fabric and do that comparison. Now again, express as lengthwise times crosswise. So in this example, there would be 82 lengthwise yarns or warp times 68 weft, okay, crosswise. Determining the yarn, determining the yarn direction, what you do is you pull out one yarn and untwist and determine how many turns per inch and twist direction. So remember, you have S twist and you have Z twist. So look at it under the pick glass. Yarn twist, you put the yarn under your pick glass and then you can count off in an inch how many turns per inch, and you've done that already. And then for the fabric does need to be on a flat surface, relaxed in a well-lit environment. So you don't want to pull the fabric. You don't want to have it crumpled up on the floor. A flat, hard surface, and make sure that the fabric is relaxed. That's why it's important that you don't do any of this visual measurements when the fabric had just been knitted or woven, because the fabric was on a lot of tension on the loom or on the knitting machine, and you need to give a chance for the fabric to relax, the yarns to relax. So it's very important that you don't take any of these measurements. Like, let's say I've picked up fabric where it was just like woven and we're gonna dye it. So I've done that, and you need to make sure you give it enough time to relax. Then you want to look at dimensional properties. So you want to look at the length and you want to make sure it's parallel to the edge or the selvage. The width crosswise needs to be, this is very important, perpendicular to the selvage or edge. It needs to meet at right angles. Okay, so if it doesn't, you have some defective fabric. Thickness is the distance between the upper and lower surfaces of the material, and we actually do use a thickness tester. There's actually a machine. This is what it looks like. You put the fabric right here and it measures how thick it is. When you're new and you don't have your own testing equipment, thickness you can pretty much feel, but fabric weight is what you would really want to know, and that information is always given to you, or at least it should be given to you when you purchase textile. So that's very important. If it's not listed on the tag, you need to ask, what is the fabric weight? Now, what is it? It's the mass per unit area, and you do see a lot of variety. It's expressed as per square yard weight of fabric, so like 36 inch by 36 inch. Means that ounces per linear yard, 36 inches long, and the width is the entire fabric width. So this is telling you that it's a 30-inch, 36-inch long fabric width, and the entire fabric width is 36. It can also be, so it can be measured by ounces per square yard, ounces per linear yard, and linear yards per pound. So the number of yards of cloth to 1 pound in a specific width. Okay, so there's 3 ways of looking at the weight. We used specific textile swatches, and we weigh them on a scale specifically for fabric, and it reads it typically ounces per yard. Okay, you have to have the sample be the same size. Now you're like, well, I don't know what's the range of fabric. Well, that's why I gave you this wonderful table. So what's considered lightweight, very lightweight, medium weight, heavyweight, and very heavyweight, you have to know. So you have to look and study this table. And anything less than 1 ounce per square yard, that's considered very lightweight material. A heavyweight would be anything over 14 ounces per square yard. And these are examples of end uses that are good for the range of fabric weight. So please review that. Now, performance testing is standardized. You do perform it the same every time. There are very specific parameters, very specific standardized testing methods and the performance that needs to be met for a fabric to be set to pass the test or not. It's very specific. It's part of your specifications. We call them specs. And what this is important is that this is part of a legal purchasing document. It basically states the performance level of the fabric. So the specifications of the fabric is important because you're making your purchase based on the information given to you. So if it tells you a specific weight, yarn twist, fabric count, all that is it's expected that that is correct, right? So the specs are very important. So that's why the testing is standardized, very important. Now there's two main bodies that have developed these tests. The ASTM, the American Society for Testing and Materials International, and the AATCC, American Associate of Textile Chemists and Colorists. Okay. So I gave you the links for both websites so you can take a look at it. But as you can see, this is their website. They do have standardized books and how to conduct these tests and the specific parameters. But the manual is expensive. We're looking at $200 to $300. And the standards in multiple volumes can go up to $700 for one book. So it's very expensive. So it does cost money. It's not like you can just print it out online, but it has very specific standardized procedures. And what it is these governing bodies have helped with labeling, and the FTC has helped created labeling instructions. But the idea is things like to test for flammability, for safety. These organizations have helped develop that, and thus that helped the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, with putting standards for like your clothing labels, which we will be talking about. So that's really important, and it has helped with creating established quality in textiles. So it's really important. So I gave you the range of weights. So testing methods, just know there's physical, color fastness, chemical, and optical tests. So physical tests are mechanical, so like a breaking strength test. So I've shown you the example of the machine that pulls the fabric, so it tests for strength. That would be a physical test, okay? A color fastness test, just know that is used to determine the resistance of dye or a print to color change due to different conditions, being wet, agitated, in the sun. Chemical tests are use chemicals to test to identify fiber content or the presence of, let's say, mercerized cotton, so mercerization in the cotton. An optical test, use a microscope for fiber identification and inspection of defects. So it's a stronger version of using your pick glass. Okay, so that would be an optical test. Now, strength tests, there are different types of strength tests. It's not just like, well, is it strong enough? There's breaking, tearing, bursting, and seam strength, okay? So what we typically look for breaking is the force required to break the fabric when it's under tension. The tearing strength is the force required to continue to tear or rip after the rip has already started. So tearing strength is how much strength do you need to continue the tearing action. Bursting is the amount of pressure required to rupture, to create that first rupture in the fabric. And seam strength is the amount of force required to break a seam. Now, this is a good time to remind you, a seam is when two pieces of fabric join together. Okay, so your side seam, or when you attach a sleeve to the body, that's a seam. So seam strength, they'll pull one side of the fabric piece and then the other. So they have to be joined, obviously, with stitching. So these are strength testers. So I've worked with one of these. They're usually about $80,000, a tensile strength tester. And it's interesting because it times it. It tells you how much strength is required, and it'll literally stop as soon as that fabric rips. And it'll tell you how much, it'll mark on the little screen how much pressure it took to rip that fabric. Surface friction test performed by rubbing action. So we're looking at abrasion resistance, which we've talked about all semester long, basically. The resistance of wearing away any part of the material when it's rubbed. And remember, we've talked about, think of all the abuse. So this is a Tabor abraser that basically has sandpaper disc, and it rubs against your fabric, and it tests to see, with certain pressure, how many rotations before it rips the fabric. Appearance test is how the fabric's going to look after being used. So we look at pilling, the tendency of those little fibers to join up and form those little balls on the surface. So pilling propensity. Soil release, is it hard if the fabric is oleophilic, which means it absorbs oils, and that's not good. Oils from food, from makeup. There's also hydrophobic, water low absorbency. The biggest issue is when a fabric is oleophilic, so it absorbs oil, and yet it's hydrophobic. It really can't take the water because then it can't really get wet enough with the detergent to clean it and remove the stain. So cheap fabric that is oleophilic, it absorbs the oil and it's hydrophobic, it doesn't like water. Those are the worst. Those are the cheap fabrics that will stain, and they, you can't get those stains out no matter how many times you wash them. So sometimes we apply finishes, obviously, and finishes help with the appearance. Stiffness, we look to see resistance of bending. So when it's stiffer, it won't bend quite as much. And wrinkle resistance allows the fabric to recover from being folded and creased and from forming undesired wrinkles. So the tumble pilling tester, these go round and round and round. They put blades at high speed, and then you have the specimens rub each other to see if they come out with any pilling balls. Functional tests, they look for air permeability, how much air goes through the fabric. Dimensional change, which is what we test for shrinkage, and you'll be doing a little shrinkage activity where basically if it gets smaller, it's shrunk, and if it's bigger, we call it growth. So it's expressed as a percentage, and the way you calculate is you take your original length, you subtract your final length, and you divide by your original length and then multiply by 100. So the appearance change, we also look at that for smoothness, flat seams, crease retention. Flammability is a fabric's ability to burn. Stretch, how much it can extend, but very important, that's just the first part. How much can it recover? In other words, snap back. And thermal insulation, the ability to trap body heat. So we've talked about all these. Color fastness, you've heard me talk a lot about this as well. Color fastness, but we haven't looked at all the different things you can test color fastness for, and this is just a listing, all this, from perspiration, laundering, light, dry cleaning, frosting, crocking, wet and dry, even burnt gas fumes. And I'm really bummed out because I ordered 2 crock meters, and this is what it looks like. We have 2 in the classroom. And I ordered it specifically so you can, you'd have to take turns, but you were going to use this to test for, it rotates the arm, you would have to crank it manually, but it tests, it goes back and forth, and we have these little white cloths to test, and it would rub against your fabric specimen to see if any dye would get removed. So it's unfortunate, we can't use it. So the next class will be able to use it, but yeah, I'm a little bummed out that you can't use it. And the last slide has a table that has different testing parameters. So it has end use, what are things that are typical end use, like pajamas, woven sport shirt, and what the minimum standards for breaking, bursting strength, for tearing strength, dimensional change after 5 washes, the appearance rating, shade change, staining, shade change, staining for dry cleaning versus laundering. So it gives you the minimum requirements for these type of end uses. So this is really good for you to compare. Please keep this, make a note of this, download this PowerPoint, and keep it for your future records.